Okay. Hey, Bright Lights, welcome back to Architecting. Today, as my guest, I have someone who I really see as the king of transformation. Steven
Ooh.
Puri is founder of the Suka, but before that, he had many
Hmm?
past lives with careers in entertainment, engineering, and is a seasoned entrepreneur. And he is going to talk today about the power of questioning the status quo and reinvention. So, welcome, Steven.
Hello. That was a very kind introduction. For those listening at home or playing along in the car, thank you for joining us. I think some of the reasons to listen today are when Angela and I have spoken before, we talked about my background as both a senior executive at a couple of motion picture studios, as well as raising $20 million of venture and running some startups, and also being a daily yogi, and kind of like how those three things have influenced the lessons that I share now. So super excited to be here.
Absolutely. So, I loved when we were talking, we both share the belief that everybody has something great inside. There's a
True.
reason we resonate with certain interests, there's a reason we choose certain careers, but so many people just don't discover it and therefore they're not content.
Yeah. What you're touching on is yes, you and I both have a strong thesis that we have something great inside. Everyone does. And the question of this lifetime is, are you going to get it out or not? And one of the things that is true about our world is there are a lot of forces set up to make sure that you don't. And those are, you know, sometimes grouped under reasons you procrastinate, reasons you're distracted, reasons, you're not motivated, things like that. And when you look at those and examine those, then you get to make more conscious choices about like, okay, am I the guy who's or girl who's going to die with that great American novel inside me, or that great building, or that great restaurant, or that great app, or whatever it is that you have inside that you can share with the world? Um, are you going to die with it? Are you going to give it to the world? And you did a really good episode that was talking about the idea of contributing as opposed to achieving. And that I think is a really great distinction of saying, like, hey, you can contribute your great thing to the world before you die, or not. And it's not necessarily about like you have to self aggrandize and be a narcissist or my ideas are best, I must do them, but rather, will the world be better if you actually do release your greatness?
And I think people often think it means, oh, that means I have to be like doing something that saves lives. And if I'm not the person who's like the firefighter rescuing somebody from the burning building,
Mm-hmm.
what I'm interested in doesn't matter. And that really isn't true because we all have the ability to touch lives and to enrich them in some way.
Yeah. And I hope in this episode, as we move from, the general philosophies we have about life down to like, what are things you can do to help you on that path? Um, we do elucidate some of the things you and I have both seen anecdotally, as well as the research, the data, the evidence, however you want to phrase it. But hey, man, before us, smart people have wrestled with this, and how do we just stand on their shoulders? That's why they're there. Is they're like, we want to hold up the next generation of thinkers and doers. So I'm excited.
Well, I think your life story is a great example of that because you didn't hold on to a traditional idea of what it meant to be successful or necessarily follow somebody else's rule book. So tell us a little bit about how you went from student to the whole spectrum of everything you've done and why that led you to create the Souk.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So the interesting thing, if you think about my life, is it's probably a spine. The story is a spine, sort of like Forrest Gump, which is I recognize an incredible amount of good luck in my life. Like things have fallen in my lap. I'd like to believe that I've coupled that with hard work to making something of the good thing. So um, to begin the story, because it kind of goes around like a clock and back to 12, is my parents were both engineers. My father designed logic chips, CPUs at IBM. My mom was a systems programmer. So, like your mom's a great ice skater. You probably learned to ice skate when you're little. I learned to code. So I'd go with mom off to the University Computing Center, which is working on her master's, which IBM graciously funded. And that was something I really enjoyed, that agency of, oh, I can actually sit here and write instructions for this thing to happen. That was really cool. And when you're little, you don't have a lot of agency. You don't get to decide when your bedtime is, where you go to school, any of that, right? So that was magical to me. Went off to USC, University of Southern California, and I was there. I was a Watson Scholar, which was great. So I had a job at IBM when I wanted to make money. And, in the dorm, a lot of my friends were in the cinema TV school because USC is arguably the best cinema TV school in the world, right? So you end up at Tuesday night watching some strange movie and then going to a diner and talking about it with your friends until 2 a.m, right? So first lucky thing, or maybe second, third lucky thing is I was in LA going to USC when film went digital. Guess who understood how to speak engineer? I did. Guess who now understood how to speak film? I did. And the intersection of those two sort of circles in the Venn diagram was very small. That was not a large cohort of people that could talk to a director about their vision for this scene and turn around to an engineer and talk about a particle system. So I fell into that. It worked out really well. I did like 14 movies in my early 20s. I worked with Jim Cameron on True Lies, worked with David Fincher on Seven, Brian De Palma on Carlito's Way, did Braveheart and Immortal Beloved with Mel, did a bunch of movies, right? So super fun. And I met Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin when they were setting up Independence Day. And that was a great friendship. We really enjoyed doing that. I produced the digital effects for Independence Day. We won the Academy Award for the visual effects on that movie, which, 1,000 people contributed. It helped all of our careers, right? And at the tail of that, Roland, Dean, and I decided to start a company together to do computer generated effects because we really enjoyed working together. So we started that. I was the president of the company, and that was my first startup. We raised about 15 million, grew up to about 80 some odd people. And then Das Werk came and acquired us about 4 years later. So I was 28 at the time, had an exit. And of course, as one thinks in their 20s, you're more successful than you actually are. You're better looking. You're funnier than you actually are. Like all these ideas about how great it was. In hindsight, a tremendous amount of luck figured into Das Werk saying, we want to buy your company. So I took 2 years off. And then I thought, what do I want to do? And I thought, I'd really like to make movies as opposed to just make a portion, the digital portion of someone else's movie. So I got on that ladder to work my way up. As you know, I ended up an executive vice president at DreamWorks for Kurtzman Orsi. That was the era of Transformers 1 and 2, Star Trek 11, Eagle Eye, stuff like that. As you can tell, I worked on a lot of big summer movies. That's kind of, my thing. And I was at Fox. I was vice president of production and development there. So that was, I was running the Die Hard franchise, the Wolverine franchise, stuff like that. And I had a moment there where I was like, you know what? I'm working in a studio that is completely interested in making sequels and prequels and spinoffs and things like that. Like they'd rather make the 19th X-Men spinoff than, anything original. And now all the studios are, obsessed with that. So I was like, I don't think I want to wake up and be 40, 50 years old making Die Hard 9, hey kids, daddy's going to make Die Hard 9 to pay for your college, So that's when I thought, what's the only other thing I know how to do, which was engineering. So I said, you know what? Let me find a problem that has an engineering solution and see if I can raise money and go do this. So I did 2 small companies, raised about 3 million for each. Both failed. It was an ego death. Felt humiliated. I just left this somewhat coveted job at a studio to go do this company, which at the time was not super. Now everyone's doing it, right? Everyone's left film and they're all trying to do tech. But at the time, it was like, what's Puri doing? Like, he's going to go do a software company? What? And I was just in terrible shape. And happily, I was doing yoga at the time. And that gave me at least an hour a day where I was like, oh, okay, I can be at rest. I can not be focused on that. And in that period of time, I met Laura, my wife, doing yoga. Shocking. Married the girl on the mat to my left. And then upon reflection, and this is the end of a long answer, but at the end of that, realized that there was a lot that I had learned about how high performers I'd worked with had developed like mental tips and tricks and techniques to, you know, to work at a high level in a healthy, sustainable way. And that really integrated well with the ideas that I've been hearing in yoga then for 10 years. And that led to creating the Suga company, which is a flow state app. It helps people, get into flow state, contain their work, do better work, feel healthier. You've talked about all these concepts on your pod.
And I love that story because it's really easy. It sounds like you had it all. You were working on blockbuster movies, like
True.
classic movies that the
Yeah.
whole world has seen multiple times. You had a fancy title. There's lots of people that would never leave.
True.
They would be
True.
afraid to let that go, to step off that mountain. So I think the ability to say, this isn't fulfilling anymore. Maybe it once was, but it's not
Yeah.
now. And so I need to move on is really important. To do another yoga reference, I had a great teacher who used to always say when we were getting into a pose, because as you know, you can go deeper into them or do
Mhm.
modifications to make them easier. And she would always
Yeah.
say, if it feels good, do more of it. If it doesn't feel good, don't do it. And I think that
Yeah.
that is something that is great life advice.
That is great yogic advice. True. True. No.
But that courage to step away when it feels like you're winning, how do you do that? Because a lot of
Well,
people would be, have their nails dug in, afraid to
let
let
me
go.
let me be more transparent about that. From the outside, the last job in film was the vice presidency at Fox, right? And they're basically the way studios are set up is you have like a chairman or chair people, chairwoman, right? Who is ultimately the green light for the studio. And they have, a cabinet of advisors, marketing, distribution people to give them their thoughts, but ultimately they're the ones who say yes to this, no to that, right? Underneath, you have usually at each studio 6 to 8 vice presidents of different flavors, SVP, EVP, EVP, right? And the studio slate all of the movies that are in some kind of development. It could be a book we optioned, a video game, right? We have a script we bought, a life rights to a great journal, whatever it is, right? All of them are divided among those vice presidents. So if you have like 8 vice presidents and you have 400 movies, on average, each vice president has 50 movies on their slate that they're responsible for nurturing. Okay. So the jobs are pretty coveted because there are maybe 30, 40 of those jobs in the world in English language, right? And after a year or two at Fox, um, I realized that I had made a decision that was not really aligned with my values. Actually, we don't need to say really. I had made a decision that was not aligned with my values, period. And when I was at DreamWorks, I will tell you there was an ethos, and this is the studio run by a filmmaker, the last studio run by a filmmaker, right? There was an ethos of, hey, go home tonight and try and make your projects 1% better. And at Fox, which is a News Corp company, there was an ethos of go home tonight, try and make your projects 1% cheaper. It's a business. And my conversation when the chairman of Fox had recruited me from DreamWorks, I was surprised because I thought I was going to a different meeting. And then suddenly it was a meeting about a job. And I was like, oh, I thought this was about a project. They're like, no, that's how we got you here, sort of on false pretenses to talk to you about this. And he's like, I will double your salary. Whatever you make you DreamWorks, we'll just pay you twice. And he said, I'll give you the Die Hard franchise to run. You probably grew up watching the Die Hard movies. I was like, I did. That's wow. Okay. I'd run the next Die Hard. Okay. And he's like, I'll give you Wolverine. I'll give you a bunch of stuff like Independence Day sequel. And you work with me on Avatar and stuff like that. So I was like, Now I made that decision to go. My sort of friend group of advisors were split. Some were like, it's an amazing opportunity. Some were like, you don't know. This is not aligned with you. This is not your jam, right? I went to go. So the real answer to your question is from the outside, amazing job. Like, hey man, you're making big blockbusters everyone sees and knows, and you're on a first name basis with all of these directors and talent and blah blah. From the inside, part of Tom's pitch to me was he's like, we can't get top writers to work here because people think of us as this, Rupert sort of grinding the pennies out bottom feeder studio. We're the studio that did Alien versus Predator. You know what I mean? Like, we'll mash anything up. We'll do any sequel, any prequel, any spinoff, sort of thing. So he's like, but you have all these great relationships because I'd worked with Billy Ray and David Ayer and Alex Kurtz and Bob Orsi and Damon Lindelof and Chris McQuarrie and like all these guys at DreamWorks, because DreamWorks is a writer-friendly studio. So you got the cream of the crop, right? So after 4 years there, I was friends with probably the top 12 action writers in Hollywood, the $1 Million Club, right? So he's like, they won't work here. But if you come here, I'll give you a blank checkbook. Just write checks to bring them here. I want to up our game, right? Mm-hmm. And I will tell you, he was honest about letting me buy stuff. I got David a project to write and direct. We made him a deal. Same, Billy Ray was writing the 24 adaptation for me. Chris McQuarrie wrote the Wolverine sequel. Damon came over. Alex and Bob and I were looking. It was amazing. And the interesting thing in year 2 was he was not going to make any of those movies. He returned like muscle memory to what did he know? And it was very interesting because I'd been cautioned about this thing. Like, no matter what he's saying about, oh, I want to be in this business, push comes to shove, he's going to go for bottom feeder stuff. So we had a draft on Die Hard 5 that was awful. Like, in DreamWorks, it would have been like fire the writer, kill the project bad. And Bruce had a window in his schedule to shoot this. And my boss was just like, just make it. Just start getting it scheduled, getting it budgeted. And I was like, the script is terrible. We should have it rewritten. By the way, the writer of that draft was kicked out of the Writers Guild for plagiarism a couple years after I left film. Someone was like, do you know what happened to him? I was like, no, like, he got kicked out. He was plagiarizing. I was like, that's a shocker to no one. Right? So that was what, when I went to the studio, he was writing a draft of Die Hard 5. They're like, you should go meet, so-and-so. I'm not going to name him. But so we met. Super fun guy. Like, if you want to go to a party and do a ton of coke and like have hookers around, like, super great guy for that. You know what I mean? But like, writing wise, not a good writer. And my boss is just like, make the movie. I was like, it's going to be terrible. He's like, if we put out a poster that says the 2 words Die Hard on it, it will make 70 million. My accountants can do the projections. People will go see it Friday to Sunday to the tune of $70 million. So if you make it for less than that, I can keep my job. And I want to keep my job. So there you go. It sort of patted me on the head. And I was like, I need to get the F out of here. Like, this was a huge mistake. And that was the beginning of the end. So it was not a hard decision to leave. It was more a wow. From the outside, this looks really great. From the inside, it's like, I'm going to be making bad Die Hard movies the rest of my life if I stay here.
That is such a great point. And thank you for sharing that sort of peek at the underbelly of what goes on in the movie. But I think it really starts to beg the question of what is success and what is failure, because there's a lot of parts of your story that to a lot of people, even to you at one point in time, sounded like success. However, what you came to realize is if you felt there was an integrity gap between what you felt good about doing and what felt meaningful to you and what you were doing, that it was actually failure.
And that awareness that the one thing even a billionaire can't get more of his time. I was like, I'm spending my time, I'm wasting my time here. That is worse than wasting money. It's worse than wasting food. Time, you just can't buy more of it. You can buy more of almost anything else.
Yeah, and I think that is really something, even my own career, that I've come to realize is 2 things I value are integrity, the truth. Is it fair? Is what we're doing the right thing to do? Is it serving people? And I also value the peace that comes with personal freedom. And a lot of jobs don't really give us that either. We put on golden handcuffs and think we're being successful.
Yep. That is very true. So the end of that was a hard reckoning for me, where I thought a lot about so what is it that I really care about? And is my life about creation? Is it about being of service? And it led me on this path, which I think the, you know, the lessons of yoga over a long enough period of time banged into your head start to have an effect on you, right? You can only be balancing in tree pose for so long before you start to listen. And that was something that is reflected in what I do now, which is I want people to have a beautiful tool to do the great thing of which they're capable, and that could be, I'm time constrained. Like I'm going to have a son in 5 weeks from tomorrow, right? Super excited about, right? And all my friends who have kids have explained to me, like, here will be the new rhythm of your life. And when you have that 90 minutes of time to actually focus on your work, you are going to make really good use of that because it's going to be precious. You'll not be able to do the sprawling thing like when you're single or early married. You're just like, all that kind of work. And I've seen that in the members of the Sukha community. I've seen like how it is a very compressed thing saying I have 90 minutes right now before, after school or before the kids or whatever it is. And how do I do the thing I need to do? So that's what's most interesting to me now, to say, how do I put some tools into the world that my kids are going to inherit? Maybe allows them to feel better, express themselves, do the thing they're capable of.
So let's talk a little bit more about what the Sukha community is and how it works, because I
Hmm?
love that you are focusing not only on the idea of success on your own terms, but flow state, and the idea that
There's that term.
when we can be in a place of self-care and groundedness and purpose driven, we can actually do more better in less time.
This is, yeah, you were speaking to my heart. And this is one of the things when I was listening to your pod before, we knew each other. And I was really excited about, which is I have been part of hustle culture. Like, and we can talk about it. There's some fun stories of both film and working in tech in San Francisco that are the, hey, if you're not sleeping under your desk a couple nights a week, are you really committed here? Right. And that is an ethos. It is propagated in certain ways by certain people for certain ends. Is it a way to produce work? Yes. Yeah, it is. Is it the way that you choose to? Maybe not. Maybe there are other ways. And that was really a lot of my exploration. And the big sort of turning point, if you will, or the eye awakening, sort of Neo in the Matrix when he sees the ones and zeros and he's like, oh, I get this now. This is all good. Okay, got it. Right? Is I was going from here, Austin, Texas, not that far from you. And I was going to San Francisco because I was going to meet with my team the next day and talk about this feature. So I wanted to go into our design system and sort of mock it up in my own hacky way and say, here's kind of it. Does everyone get it? Do we want to develop this, right? Alaska runs that route nonstop. Got on the plane. Captain's like, hey, sorry, Wi-Fi's out. Whoops, okay, fine. So started working, took off. Like 15 minutes later, we were starting to descend. And I was like, we're in Dallas. Like the engine fell off. They don't want to tell us something really bad happened, but like we just took off a minute ago. And I looked down and we're 2 hours and 40 minutes had gone by. And I was like, I couldn't tell you if the drink cart had come by. I didn't know my seatmate's name. Nothing. I had been in it. And the designs were done. And I liked them. And I had prepared myself for when we land, I got to rush out to the air train, get to the hotel and pick up a sandwich and finish my work in the hotel room. And in reality, I was like, I'm done. I called a buddy of mine. I was like, hey, man, I have a free night in SF. You want to go have dinner? And it was a very eye awakening. Like, what was that just happened? Because I had no concept of time. And I did what I thought was great work in a very compressed, like you said, very compressed amount of time. Now, later, as Steven grows up and gets smarter, he understands flow states. At the time, I was just like, magic thing happened. Cool, right? So to set the table, because I know there's a portion of your audience that is super flow master, and there's another that hasn't maybe heard about flow states because they're becoming super popular and the concept is, in the zeitgeist, right? But the concept, which I obviously have researched a lot now, is, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, this Hungarian American psychologist, had this thesis that these high performers in different disciplines, athletes and artists and scientists and inventors, they go into these concentrated states where they do the thing that makes them famous, the thing that moves the world. And they talk about it in very similar ways. And he was like, what's up with that? So, like Prometheus, he wanted to go up on Mount Olympus, steal some fire, bring it down to the rest of us, goes, here's the deal. So at the end of his research, he wrote the book Flow, from whence we get the name Flow State. And he said, I think the most wonderful thing, he was like, I chose this word because it was the most beautiful metaphor for what I found, which is we're all on the river paddling to move ourselves forward. But if you align your boat with the current, it carries you, it magnifies your efforts, you go further and faster. And that's what these people I studied know how to do, and do it reliably. And that was fascinating to me. And that has inspired me to say, okay, who else has been researching this? And there are a lot of, it's this giants standing on the shoulders of giants thing where it's like, and Kotler and Cal Newport, where he's written about deep work and shallow work, and, Near and his concepts of, the internal and external triggers, and the work that he's done with the social media companies and things like that. That to me is absolutely fascinating, because once you do, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here because you've done episodes very similar to this. The thing that I wanted to bring to this, it's maybe a little different than what you've said in the past, is that inspired me to say, oh, if there are a couple of components that help people get into flow, could I create a website, super simple, that just has a play button in the middle, and when you click that before you start work, it gives you a lot of the things that research shows help you drop in. Like good examples, music. There's a ton of research now in music that helps you get into flow. And a lot of it says the sweet spot for most people is like 60 to 90 beats per minute, certain key signatures, ambient non-vocals, you're not singing along with, pop song. We all have friends who are, the outliers. Friend who listens to Tchaikovsky or show tunes or 90s gangster rap or, whatever, right? We all have the outliers. But there's stuff like that. And I thought, you know what? These pieces that help us be intentional with our productivity. And like you said, think about how do we contribute in a healthy way, as opposed to just like this solo achievement mindset of let me stay awake all night and destroy my body, as opposed to like you talked about ultradian rhythms and circadian rhythms and stuff like that, right? How do you respect that? Oh, we have a Pomodoro timer. When you hit play, it reminds you, hey, it's been 25 minutes. Why don't you stand up and stretch? Why don't you go for a quick walk? Why don't you get a glass of water? Do you want to do a breathing exercise? And they're just there for you, to say, hey, respect that. After 2 hours, we encourage you to get up. You did an episode just about this. It was like, how do you remind yourself when you're deep in it to respect that next hour, the marginal amount of work you're going to do is very different than the first hour when you refresh. So go refresh. And it seems counterintuitive, but you'll actually get more quality work done, right? Things like that I learned. So that was my path to say, I think in this life, really what I'm here is to be of service, to create something that allows people to get into flow, to feel happier. Long speech, but I was on my soapbox. I'm down now.
No, I love it, because I think most of us, like you said, come from this hustle culture, certainly in the design world, because there's no right
Mm-hmm.
answer. And you know this from film too, because it's creative
Yeah.
work. You
Yes.
can iterate endlessly. You can criticize yourself and second guess yourself ad infinitum. But the best definition of creativity I've ever heard was, if you know it will work, it isn't creative. There's a certain amount of creativity.
Wow, I've never heard that one before. That's a really interesting way of thinking about
I know you got to
creativity.
kind of take a
If you
beat
know
and
it will
like
work,
really let it sink in of like,
it's really
oh,
good.
yeah.
Who said that?
I have to look it up because I read it in an article.
Oh, we're going to
And
be Googling that after
yes,
this
I,
episode.
I will
Yeah,
find it and send it to you.
I
But
would love that. Thank you.
the
Okay, back to
bottom
you.
line is that we can't be creative though when we're stressed out, because when you think
Mhm.
about what is the stress response is, in some way I feel a threat, and
Yeah.
I am putting all of my physical and mental resources into being safe.
Mhm.
So what is being safe? Doing what I know works. That's the opposite of being creative. And that's why grinding through when you're tired when your brain is just not
Yep.
thinking efficiently or effectively is never going to get you the solution you can get when you are in flow state.
Yeah. And when you talk about solution, let's go backwards for a moment and talk about problem, because ideally those should fit like Lego blocks, right? And in our community, we have like 30 some odd thousand people. So I talk to a lot of people who ask me for advice or share their stories or what they struggle with. And I'm going to tell you, it goes straight down the middle of it mirrors what the research has told us, which is there is the procrastination thing, which often comes down to I'm overwhelmed. There are too many things to do. I don't know where to start, or there's something so big, I can't make a dent in it. So why start? There's distraction. And I mean, we could do a whole episode on that. Like, it is incredible. Like, Laura and I have a bunch of friends that are either at one of the Facebook meta companies or used to be at Twitter or TikTok. And when you really understand the math going on inside, is astounding how we get anything done. You have the $1 trillion companies, their business model is steal your life, period, full stop. And 10 years ago, Zuckerberg would kind of obfuscate that when he had to go to Congress. He's like, oh no, we just, grandmothers seeing grandchildren's videos. And now they're straight up. It's like in their quarterly filings. They're like, this is how much live we stole this quarter. Next quarter, we're going to employ these new techniques to steal more of everyone's lives. And that will enrich our shareholders. Thank you. Right. And it's astounding when you think about they have the money to pay the best designers, the best engineers, the best behavioral economists and psychologists on staff to determine exactly what should that little ding look like. When should they show you this? How many pixels is the rounding of that corner to get you to give up your life? And when you put it very plainly, it's like if Zuckerberg called you up and said, hey, Angela, I'd like your life. And I'm going to sell it to these advertisers and I'll keep the money. But I'm going to give you some dancing cat videos. How's that? Is that good? It
What a
sounds
deal.
ridiculous, right? It sounds ridiculous. And it is exactly what's going on. And when you think about where we started this episode, if you believe you have something great inside you and you can contribute this to the world, there's a tug of war. And on one side of that rope are these $1 trillion companies paying the smartest people to pull. And the other side of the rope is you fighting for your attention, fighting for your life, fighting for your own ability. And I just want to make that tug of war a little more fair, because it's I hope that my children's generation looks at our generation with social media the way I look at my dad's generation with smoking. And I beat my dad up sometimes where I'm like, hey man, 3 of your friends died of lung cancer. You watched them in the hospital die, and like, emphysema. How could you do that to yourself? And he's like, you don't understand. The movie stars were all smoking. Like, the tobacco companies were putting out studies on how healthy tobacco was for you. He's like, it was a different time. And now we have people that are wasting their lives watching Kim Kardashian getting 50 million views for basically an ad for her underwear. That's content. So I really hope my kids look at us like, how did you waste your life watching Kim Kardashian underwear ads and double tapping? Because where that leads is, yeah, you're the 80-year-old person on the sofa scrolling and double tapping. Shoulda, coulda. I had that idea for a book, building, restaurant, app. I could have done that. I could have written that. You don't want to be that person. And you know what? No one wants to be around that person. It's miserable.
Yeah.
So,
And I think
yeah,
there's
it's
a
like
certain
contribute.
echo chamber there too, because the algorithm keeps feeding you more
Hmm?
of the same, so that it's like almost like an infinite scaling down of your
Hmm?
field of awareness.
Yes, which leads to, like you said, a lot of the divisions in the country and the world, because there is something healthy about being exposed to viewpoints that are not your own in a human way. I'd love to understand why you eat that kind of food, why you think what you think, why your boats are shaped like this. Why do you guys dress this way as opposed to us and them. And people right now who shall remain nameless have definitely understood how to motivate people through anger, hatred, division. And it is about them pointing a finger at a group of people and saying them. And that's hopefully this is a passing crisis and we shall rise up, you know.
And I think it is a lot about getting more curious. You know, when
Mm-hmm.
we just focus on what we like and we only keep seeing that, and whether it's good or bad, that's all we want to look at or focus on and shut everything else or other everyone else, we lose our curiosity.
Yeah.
And that curiosity is what leads us to say, what if? And what if is the start of any great creative project.
It's absolutely true. And that is so awesome in film and storytelling in general. Just that sense of like, what if there were a blind man who had to climb Mount Everest and, his daughter was, and you're like, I wonder how that would play out. What would be his struggle? That's, yeah.
But these are fantastic questions to ponder and something
Mm-hmm.
that really, I think, jolts us out of the complacency we have with
Mm-hmm.
what feels safe and makes us realize that that's the riskiest way to spend our lives that we could possibly choose is the one that feels safe.
Mm-hmm. So I have a question for you. Do you ever have a lack of motivation? Is there ever a morning where you're like, whew, boy, I gotta like work myself up to get into this?
All the time, all the time.
How do you
And
how do you handle it when you recognize that in yourself? What do you do?
I just give myself permission to do what I feel like doing. So it might look like goofing off, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh, you're late for work because you were playing computer games instead of
Right.
getting ready. But that was what my mind needed because
Mm-hmm.
I've worked for enough years to know that I can come up with a amazing solution in 15 minutes sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And if I tried to force myself to do it because I should get to work at a certain time and I should sit at my desk with a program open, I
Right.
could spend 2 hours and not get there where I got in
Mm-hmm.
15 minutes. So I don't push myself. And I think that aligns a lot with what you're trying to do is this idea that you can't flog yourself into productivity.
It is true. And I'll tell you, productivity, and you also talk about creativity a bunch in the pod. And I imagine, a number of people listening do have to create. They are not accountants just looking at spreadsheets. They're actually trying to bring forth things that didn't exist before, right? And that's a very different way to use your brain and your spirit. Um, Something I thought, well, I'll tell you a story because stories are fun, right? So my first job when I was actually transitioning out of USC into film was an ad agency. A friend of mine had introduced me to an ad agency that did trailers for movies and like music videos and commercials for movies and stuff like that, right? So I went there, and at the time, my job was we would get in rough cuts of movies, and our biggest clients were Warner Brothers and Buena Vista, which is Disney essentially. I would assign them to writers, to producers. Say, oh, hey, Angela, you did that great job with the Will Ferrell comedy for Sony last summer. They have another one, and I'd love for you to take a look at it, right? So you'd go on with the movie, watch it, write a trailer. So the company's owned by these two guys who are 20 years older than I and very well respected in the business, like great promo guys. So for the purpose of the story, one of them, whose name is Jeff, he's the only person in my life who's ever called me Stevie. He called me Stevie. That's how the story goes. Okay. So he comes in my office and he's a very rough and tumble like guy driving a big truck with big tires and, director. And he goes, Stevie, Bart. And I was like, Bart, there's a guy in the vault who delivers tapes named Bart. I met him. Yeah. He's like, you ever give Bart a trailer to write? I'm like, are we talking about Bart, the guy who like gets coffee and drops tapes off? Are we talking about the same Bart? He's like, yeah, I have an instinct about him, Stevie. And I was like, Jeff, you're the boss. You want me to give him something? Done. So I chose like a Warner Brothers B title that had like a month deadline, right? So if he came back after a week, I hate this. Fine. Pro could knock it out, right? Like you said, the 15-minute pro. So 2 days later, Jeff's back in my office. Stevie, how's Bart doing? I don't know, Jeff. I gave it to him 2 days ago. I didn't want to stress him out. I'll check with him on Monday. Okay, fair. What else did you give him? He's never ridden a trailer before, Jeff. I gave him one movie. Like, I'm not going to, come on. He goes, Stevie, let me explain to you how creativity works. It's always about the other thing. It's like if you give Bart one movie to watch, he's going to sit there and stare at it with little like beads of sweat coming down his temples. And he is going to write the most obvious B version you can imagine. He's like, you have to give him something else because the part of your brain that does the, I don't know, chocolate and peanut butter, what do they taste like together? He's like, that is not the part you think you're thinking with. And can I tell you, 20 years later, how many times I've seen Jeff proven correct with screenwriters, television writers, UI UX designers, like engineers. Like, it is astounding what he gave me in that funny interaction when I was 20 years old. And it is true. There's a great book on the neuroscience of this. I know you dig your neuroscience, called The Net and the Butterfly, about capturing those ideas, by Olivia Fox Gabon and Judah Pollack. And it talks about the executive mode and default mode networks and kind of like how they react. If you want to understand like the science of why that thing is, where I don't know about you, I do have some of my best ideas: walking, driving, showering, doing the dishes, like things where my executive mode network is kind of busy and can't supervise the default mode that, like you said, does the, hey, what if this? And you're like, what does a cell phone taste like? My executive mode network would never think that. My default mode is like, huh. And then you end up with an ad where the cell phone turns into a candy bar, So anyway.
No, I love that because not only
Yeah.
do I do that, because I feel like sometimes our brain works like a processor. So you put the
Yeah.
problem in and then you don't think about the problem, you go do other stuff, but your brain
Correct.
is still in the background, kind of churning away. So when you come back to look at the problem, you have already done some pre-work without knowing it.
Yes.
But I also, similar to your story, I'm usually doing 3 or 4 things at a time. So people are always like, do you sleep? How do you do all this stuff? And I'm like, no, sleeping is my hobby. So yeah, I
Yeah.
definitely sleep. But it's more that if I feel stuck, I move on to do something different. And especially if this something different is completely different. So I might be drawing plans and trying to do medical planning.
Mm-hmm.
And then I might switch to writing my book, or I might switch to
Yep.
doing research, completely different things. But that helps because you're using different parts of your brain to do all of
Mm-hmm.
that. And in the
Yeah.
meantime, though, in the subconscious, you're still processing how to solve the problems. And like you were saying, you're getting that adjacent possible thinking as one task, and the structure behind it starts to
Right.
inform the other thing that
Yeah.
you're doing.
And one of the things is you start to learn as you examine how you work and how your friends work and your colleagues work, you start to learn those little mental tricks to get you to do things. And the thing around, hey, you know what? I'm not going to focus and obsess on this because I'm let my unconscious or my subconscious or whatever, however you want to phrase it, your default mode, focus on this. I'm going to go over and do these other things like you do, right? And then you come back and your default mode is like, oh, I have something for you, right? There's another similar thing that I saw in film, which is about how you can train your mind to fall in certain places, like the relationship between physical space and mental space. And when I mentioned to you, I started my first company with Roland and Dean, right? Because we'd met back, Stargate days. And when they wrote, would rent this villa in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. Apparently, I've never been there. Apparently, beautiful white marble villa, the whole thing in the hills, right? And I asked Dean about this once. I was like, why do you guys go down there? Like, you have beautiful homes in Los Angeles, right? He's like, there's this room there where in the morning the sun comes over the pool. And in that room, we never think about like our agents or what the budget will be or what the studio notes will be, or, we just think, what's the movie we would want to see? And we just write that.
Mm.
So when they were going off to write this, Roland told his assistant, Joey, Joey, go rent the villa, right? And she came back and it was like an Airbnb kind of situation, pre-Airbnb. She's like, it's rented. Someone's there this month. And it was around the office like this hue and cry of like, oh my God, what are the guys going to do? Roland had his entertainment attorney, John Deemer, buy the villa that weekend, bought it. Monday, Roland owned a $5 million villa in Puerto Vallarta. Where those renters went, I do not know. I'm sure somewhere very nice. They were paid to like move. And the guys went down there because that was their thing. In that space, we have this. They came back with the script that became the third highest grossing movie in film history at the time, right?
So it was
That
a
was
good
their jam.
investment.
And it was a great investment. And it's not to say you need a $5 million, villa to do your architecting or do your writing. Because I'll tell you later when I was at DreamWorks with Alex Kurtzman and Bob Orsi. For those who don't know who they are, because they're not that famous, they're the writers behind Transformers 1 and 2 and Mission Impossible 3 and The Island and the Zorro and the Star Trek 11 and all that stuff, right? Fantastic big writers. And we were on the little Amblin compound, little southwestern Adobe compound for DreamWorks on the Universal lot, right? When they got in the crunch, oh, we have to deliver Transformers 2 in 3 weeks, right? They had their assistant rent a hotel room across the street, across Lancashire at the Universal Hilton, which I'm just going to say is not a property you seek out. Unless you have 3 kids, you're going to Universal Studios the next day. It's not really like a resort property. And I was like, they have a ton of money. Why do they go there? And I realized they had met back in school. And I think that evoked dorm room for them with Kurtzman on the edge of the bed on his laptop and Bob at the little desk on his laptop. And it got them into the mental state of we're these young, scrappy writers. We have to prove ourselves and like get this thing out. And it worked. And it probably cost them $300 a night. Right? So it was an interesting experience seeing how these top writers and directors had that understanding of, oh, I've trained my brain in this space. I fall into this state where I can do this. And I use that now. I did not use that when I started working from home. And those playing along at home or listening in the car maybe recognize that, where if you are working from home, part of the laptop is you can work in the kitchen in the morning and you can take the laptop upstairs later. You can sit on the sofa, whatever. And I was doing that. And I realized it was harder for me to focus as opposed to now I have my laptop set up upstairs here. And when I enter here, there's no sense of like, well, I could be doing laundry. I could be doing the dishes. I could be doing, it's just, oh no, I'm here, talk to Angela, do a couple hours of coding, go to lunch, come back, write a blog post. Like it's very clear. My brain goes, oh, this is why we're here. And that's really helpful. So, and it's free. You don't need you don't need my website. You don't need anyone's app. It's just do it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's something about the ritual and the associations we make with place
Completely. Yeah.
that are really powerful. But to wrap up today, because we're going to have to
Mm-hmm.
talk again. This was an amazing conversation,
I'd
and
love
we
this. So much we didn't cover.
definitely
Yeah.
could talk a lot longer. But how can people learn more about the Suka, connect with you, become part of that community?
Oh, that's very sweet. I'll say 2 things. One, if there's anything I've said where someone wants to learn more, and it does not have to be about what I created, the Suka website, right? My email address is very public. It's Steven, Steven, at the Suka. Suka means happiness, right? So THESUKHA.co for company. If they're like, who's that Hungarian guy? Can I read more about that? Or I was in the car, you mentioned Cal Newport. What, I will send you back. If you email me, I will send you back. Here's a great link or a blog post or something to learn more about that. Or here's where you can buy that book. So that's open invite. And if someone wants to experiment with flow states, this is what we built, and it's free for 7 days. So no credit card, no funny business we charge you if you don't cancel. Try it and come with something you need to do. Think of a task, an actual task. Like if you just come hit play for 2 minutes and leave, you're like, oh, it plays music. I don't get it, right? The magic is when you look up after an hour or two and you go, oh my God, like I feel great. My work's done. Right? So bring a task. Come, try it free for a week. Drop in the group chat, say hi. Hey, I was listening to an Angela's podcast.
Now that sounds fantastic. I love the idea that you just would listen to it as the soundtrack to your day.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for reaching out for this great conversation and for, the work that you're doing, because I think that we could all benefit in today's modern world where we are chronically stressed out in rethinking things and sort of defragging our minds
Mhm.
and really getting into this flow state where we're meant to be, right?
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. So, yes, thank you for having me. And I'm hoping this is helpful for those who are still listening.
No, it definitely was. So thanks again.